You're watching The Business of Law, brought to you by Bloomberg Law and the ABA Journal. I'm Lee Pacchia. A recent study put out by Harvard Business School examines a novel approach to legal services procurement at big pharma company GlaxoSmithKline. And joining me now to go over what it takes to sell your law firm services to a Fortune 500 company, we have the authors of the study, writer, professor, and consultant Silvia Hodges Silverstein, and Heidi Gardner, assistant professor at Harvard Business School. Welcome to you both. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
So really interesting paper here looking at the procurement system set up at GSK. Silvia, how did this study come to pass?
I've been studying purchasing decisions in the legal field for the last decade or so. And I used to study how the big companies buy it, how the small companies, the medium-sized companies buy it in the US and overseas. And I saw a phenomenon in the last few years that it was more and more procurement coming in. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I did 2 studies on procurement. And then through that, I had met people from GlaxoSmithKline. And the more I heard about them, the more I found out what they do. I thought this is a really interesting story. And Heidi and I met at a conference where we were both speaking, and our topics were pretty aligned. And so we basically met, and I don't know, it was like a really fast decision that this was a good idea, because this is a topic that is really changing the game in the legal industry.
I mean, it's fascinating that in some ways they are doing in the legal services arena what other departments and other industries have done decades ago, right? And so in some ways it's merely a catch-up game. But in some ways, because it's happening in the legal arena, it actually has nuances that make it fascinating to study. I mean, there are implications for the legal profession and other professions that I think we haven't even begun to touch on.
Yeah, absolutely. 15 great pages here. What was the main takeaway that jumped out at you?
They are revolutionizing the way that legal services are going to be procured, and I think they're probably on the leading edge. We can argue about whether some of the nuances and the mechanics of the way they're going about it is the way everyone will pick up on, but by and large, they are trying to source for value. They're trying to really understand through a data-driven approach what they need and what they're getting in terms of their legal services suppliers. And they're using a pretty rigorous approach to both evaluate that on the front end, what they need, what they expect to get, how much they expect to pay for it, and then they've got the follow-through to say, did we get that and what should we do differently next time?
Could you take us through how this process works?
So basically they established that every case over a certain threshold, in GSK's case it's 250,000, has to go through a reverse auction. So rather than hiring the people that you went to law school with, that you have a relationship with, it is actually that you go through, as Heidi said, a system that is very well thought through, that uses data and really has established clear performance metrics and basically take it to the next level. So how it works, so when a new case comes in, the managing attorney has to decide what kind of firms, after that person really thinks about, what is involved, which kind of firms would be the ones that could potentially take care of helping them solve that problem. And then it goes, they need to fill in a requirement sheet, which then goes to procurement. Procurement then sends out the requirements to the different law firms. Then they can think about, do we want to participate, do we not participate? They fill it in and send in their first response to the proposal. So once the law firms had some time to think about what it involves and what they think how much it should cost, procurement looks at it again, and then when they decide, well, these firms, now that we've looked at their information, really are capable of doing that, they are invited to the sourcing room event, where then the firms basically, because basically the quality has been decided at that point in time, so it's not anymore that you choose between firms who are higher in quality and lower in quality. The GlaxoSmithKline at that point in time sees that they're all pretty much at the same level. So then it really becomes a matter of price. And then when the sourcing event is over, then the procurement takes all this information back to the in-house counsel. They can look at all the information, and sourcing makes some suggestions, but it's actually the legal department, the in-house lawyers, who make the final decision. So procurement is really there to make the process help them speed up the process and help them make it more efficient and more objective.
Now, and Heidi, it's a thoughtful process that's been set up, but you can also see a situation where there's a pressing legal matter, and as time is money, do you see certain cases where process might actually get set aside in an emergency? And if so, what kind of case might go off that track?
I can imagine there may be situations. I think they're smart enough to not be slaves to the system. This system is not meant to replace judgment and wisdom, and I think that they'll veer off the track if they absolutely need to. That said, the system is robust enough that they can gear it up and gear it back depending on the needs of the matter. And so I think they can move very quickly with this kind of system if the case demands it. And I think they can also choose the level of detail that they put into things like the request for proposal, the RFP, that will allow them to be speedier, more responsive, more thoughtful. And I think those kind of parameters are probably built into the system the way they've designed it.
Sylvia, I gotta say, reading this study, I got the impression that it could at times be costly for GSK to implement this process. At the end of the day, they're still going to need to pay lawyers something to do the work. How much are they actually going to save on this program?
So the savings of this program were immense. So they saved, they said, 7 figures. So Dan Troy, the GC of GSK, when he started this project, he knew that he had to, as he said, spend a little to save a lot. So he was very clear about that. He needed to put some money into that. So he started his team. They had this cross-functional team and then hired additional data analysts. So they were very clear that they need to augment the resources that they had because they could really run a proper system. But in the end, they said that both on the savings side, it was more than they ever even hoped for, and then also on the quality side, because very often these when procurement is involved and lawyers' first response is, well, but it's all about quality in the end. So what GSK found, and actually we've seen in our research with other large companies, the quality actually doesn't seem to be suffering at all when such processes are embraced.
So ultimately, we're talking about 7 figures in savings on annual legal expenditures. That's the bottom line number that we're looking at here?
I think the 7 years were in the accumulative of over the last 3 years.
Okay.
And I think it's probably important to realize that it's not just the financial savings that are important here. I mean, this is supposed to be a way of predicting legal spend much more accurately. So they're working on essentially fixed fee arrangements. And that makes the legal spend much more predictable, which is obviously important. They're not going to get a shocking bill at the end of it that they didn't expect. And so they have baked into the process ways to make the whole legal purchasing arena much more predictable. And there's savings that are accumulating because of that predictability as well.
Now, law firms are probably watching this program with a heightened degree of interest. Are there certain law firms out there either in size or specialization or general makeup that would fare better under this process, or is that something that just isn't apparent at this point?
So what we're seeing in the market of, let's say, the big law firms, there are more and more law firms that are now embracing things like project management, process improvement, and other measures, which basically are needed in order to deliver to these arrangements that firms would have with companies like GlaxoSmithKline. So there are more and more that are embracing, and we actually talked about this earlier today. We estimate that over a third of the MLaw 100 firms are actually already embracing these kind of measures. Are there any excluded? Well, you know, the market is changing right now, so I think that some might believe that they're excluded. I do forecast that in the end there might be a handful of firms that don't have to worry about efficiency because they only do the most crisis type work when then in
firms
the end,
that don't have to adjust their fees
right,
for anyone.
But I think that
the top of the top.
Right, but I think that, you know, what's defined as better company type work, I think that is actually smaller and smaller piece of the market, whereas where you need experience and you need a good team, I think that is basically what makes up a big part of that, and hence lots of lawyers think that procurement only does commodity sourcing. So I think that is our case here with GlaxoSmithKline shows that that's no longer the case.
I mean, there might be some that find it much harder to deliver under this kind of system, some that aren't prepared for it. But I think, as Silvia said, it's going to be a handful that don't need to respond eventually.
Thank you for stopping by today. Really interesting study.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about the issues we just discussed, be sure to go check out our offerings on BloombergLaw.com and also on the Bloomberg Terminal. You can see more of our videos on YouTube, and you can follow our updates, of course, on Twitter. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.